Welcome to the Archispeak podcast. I'm Evan Troxell.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And this is another guest episode. And today we have a friend of the show, David Bradley. And David is an architect's coach. What do you think about that?
I'm ready to be coached.
Yeah.
Put me in coach.
I feel like this is one of those subjects that people are willing to listen to it, but maybe they're not willing to do anything about it. And I'm hoping to get people to do something about it by listening to what's possible, what other people's experiences are, things like that. So this is a longer conversation for sure. And so I want to read his bio and just get right into it. Architects, more than any other profession, are trained to create possibility where none currently exists. Having experienced the challenge of running his own design firm, David Bradley founded Blueprint for Living Coaching in 2014 with a mission to inspire architects and design professionals around the world to create lives well lived from intention and purpose. He combines more than 25 years of experience as a global architect, businessman, and industry leader with world-class training as a certified professional coach. He has walked the talk as owner of his own design firm. He has stepped into leadership positions in the American Institute of Architects. He has coached high-performing individuals, firms, studios, and leaders across North America, including C-suite professionals at an engagement at the United Nations. So this was a fantastic conversation with David. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't want it to stop, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I think it will definitely have to invite David back to continue the conversation. Anyway, let's jump right into the conversation because, again, I can't wait for people to listen to this, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So let's do it. David, welcome to the Archispeak podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, you guys. I am thrilled to be here. Very excited to have this conversation.
We'll ask you if you're still thrilled afterwards.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're starting high.
Exactly.
I'll report back later.
David, you're an architect and you are doing something very different than architecture right now. And so tell us how you got to where you are now and that journey, what that was like. Because I think a lot of people, we've actually had guests on the show. We've had Jake Rudin from Out of Architecture. We've had Evelyn Lee, who is working at Slack and got out of architecture. You're still adjacent to architecture, but in a different way. And I think it's kind of interesting for architects to hear where other architects have gone and what that journey was like and what was it like for you?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to represent alternative careers in architecture. Let's see, I'll try to make this a nutshell story. I was licensed in 1998. I had been interning, working for a firm in Chicago. I'd been there about 4.5 years, took my boards, passed them all, went through, and had been told I was going to be promoted, and then it never happened. And there were a bunch of things going on. I wasn't very happy there, to be perfectly honest. I wasn't enjoying the work. I wasn't enjoying the people, the clients. I was pretty miserable, to be honest. And I went home and called my mom, who's my best advisor, and she said, "I'm sick of listening to you, bitch. Do something." Love her. And the next day I went in and I gave my 2 weeks notice.
Wow.
My mom's response was, wow. She was like, that's not really what I was thinking about, but okay. And so, but I had been doing a little bit of work on the side, and I parlayed that over the next 10 years into a 6-person design firm in Chicago. Just started freelancing and pulling in whatever I could. And that took me until 2008. And something happened in 2008.
The gut punch in 2008.
Yeah, it's kind of like the rug got pulled out from under everybody. And unfortunately, I was hugely exposed. I was doing a lot of developer work. And within the course of 2 weeks, I had about $2 million in commissions just evaporate. Yeah, just a phone call that said, "Hey, you know what? We've decided we're going to put things on hold for a bit." And I just watched my firm just disintegrate because I just didn't have any income coming in. I hung on for about six months, but eventually just dejected. I let everybody go, and I was a little bit lost for a bit. I threw my resume out on the internet. I might be the only person on the planet who got a job through monster.com, but I was picked up by a German company in Stuttgart that specializes in tensile designs.
Nice.
And I knew very, very little about tensile design, but it was a really good match. They hired me because they had projects they wanted to set up in the States, and they wanted somebody, a licensed architect with about my years of experience, to manage their portfolio and open a branch office. So I moved to Stuttgart. I landed there the day that Goldman Sachs tanked. So I thought that was a sign. And I was there for 9 months training and working with them. Loved the people, found the work absolutely fascinating, and then came back to Chicago and basically managed their branch office for the next several years. Loved the work. If you know the suicide prevention barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge, that was our firm, those nets that are hung off the sides. That was one of our projects. So I just, great experience. But the work was very feast or famine. And eventually I went to my boss and said, look, if you keep me on payroll, I'm going to bankrupt you. And that's not in anybody's interest. So let me go on a contract basis with you and I'll fill in the gaps. I had no idea how I was going to fill in the gaps. And a friend, I didn't want to go back to another architecture firm. I just wasn't feeling it. And a friend kept poking me and saying, you should look into coaching. Well, he was going through this coaching program. And I said, dude, I'm an architect. I don't want to be a coach. What are you talking about? But he kept pushing a little bit. And finally I said, you know what, fine, I'll check it out. It landed with me. I went to one of their workshops, and next thing you know, I signed up for their year-long intensive training program. And I still didn't want to be a coach. But I wanted, as an architect, we love to know how things work. And I decided at that point, well, I want to get a coach, and that's one of the benefits of this program. And for just a little more investment, I can actually get behind the curtain and see how everything works, right? So I went into this program, super intense. It was quite an experience. About 3 months in, I got hired, and I started coaching somebody. It was referred to me. It wasn't even an architect. The guy was an accountant. But I had a ball, and I realized, whoa, wait a minute. I'm good at this. I really enjoy it. And wow, I'm getting paid for it. I can actually do this for a living. And so I started using that to fill in the gaps. It used another side of my brain. It was sort of like it's a completely different way of thinking from architecture. And I really appreciated it. Graduated from that program. I got certified with the International Coaching Federation. And I started a practice. And that was Blueprint for Living. And the idea was, over time, I said, I love architecture. I love architects. And there's a need for this in the profession. Like there's just I would consistently meet architects who were absolutely miserable. And I thought, what a tragedy that these brilliant people are so unhappy. There's got to be some way to help everybody, right? And it's not across the board, but I just consistently, I was at cocktail parties and people were just really, really, and part of it was the recession. It was post-recession. Sure. This was around 2013. People were recovering, but so it just sort of developed over time that I decided that my niche was going to be coaching architects and design professionals, and so that's where Blueprint for Living came up. And it's gone well enough that I haven't really practiced as an architect since. I still have my license, but this is kind of where I think I found my jam.
It's interesting. It's funny. It's some of my experience somewhat parallels yours. That me and a college roommate of mine, we were kind of solo during 2005 through 2008. 2007 started happening to us because we were doing a lot of development work, and then 2008 was the gut punch that just said, "Hey, what are we going to do?" Right. And whereas, and this kind of goes back to some of the things I had been listening to, some of your past work with the perspectives, and listening
the blogs
to
on my website.
Exactly, some of your blogs, and and it was talking about. I don't know if we were able to. I think you said carpe cross, seize tomorrow.
Yes,
and,
right.
And what was interesting about it is it was this. I don't know if anybody was ready to plan and seize tomorrow, and so it was one of those like, oh no, what do I do? And I had a headhunter who actually started calling me and asking me, hey, do you want to move to? I was in Florida, and they were like, do you want to move to Las Vegas or Dallas, Texas, or Washington D.C.? And I turned to my wife and I'm like, well, what do we want to do? Because we've got 3 kids. We just, our last one was just born. And what do we do now? And that was the thing, is like, run to safety, run to something that, kind of took care of us while we were there. And it's interesting because you say 2013 was when we started to somewhat kind of feel that. The thing about it is in a way, we're still feeling it. And I know you probably, talk to a lot of people, during coaching because, we lost such a, we lost people like you, we lost that middle generation of what would be now project managers, potentially, junior or principals and things like that. And they just left. And so there's like this big, massive gap.
I hadn't even thought about it that way.
Yeah. And it's just kind of interesting because as much as we think that, architects can just kind of handle it themselves, it's interesting because there is this need for what you do, because in a way, it's just like, we can't be all, on an island all by ourselves. This is just a raft. We just sent afloat and,
And yet that's how society looks at us, and that's how we see ourselves often because of studio culture. Howard Rourke, right? It's the hero architect who stands against all the onslaughts of the world, right? And I think that's sort of bred into us through our education, and then later through the profession too. There's not a lot of support.
In school, everybody's taught to be the Lone Ranger who has to solve all the problems on their project. I mean, it was
and come up with the perfect solution.
We rarely had a team project, and when we did, we hated it, right? And then we graduate out of that into the real world, and every project is a team project, and you're relying on other individuals. But you're also, the thing that was coming to my mind as you were talking was, architects are often in reaction mode, and it is a different part of our brain that is that proactive mode. And the kind of the theme that we've talked about, kind of trying to tackle tonight, or at least begin to tackle in this podcast, is designing. I hate to say it like this, but I don't hate to say it like this because there's a book titled this, Designing Your Life. It's also a course at Stanford, and it's a fantastic book. We don't tend to think of it that way. We don't tend to think of it as designing our practice. We design solutions for other people. And so therefore we're often fielding all of those inputs to synthesize something into an output. But we're usually in the catching mode where we're constantly, we're being bombarded with information, building codes, hoops, red flags, blazing fireballs, fire hoses, of information. And we're just taking it. And rarely do we have the opportunity to step back and work on ourselves or work on our businesses to be something different, and more of the time even, we're constantly just doing it how we've always done it. We talk about that a lot on this podcast. So those are the kinds of thoughts that are crossing my mind as you're talking about your unconventional path. And I would love to just kind of define, before we even define kind of the foundation of the conversation, but define what coaching is and why you're doing what you're doing.
Sure.
And add one more to that, and why architects need coaching, because in a lot of times we're like the self-healers, right? So why, as an architect and a coach, do you feel architects need coaching?
Got it. So we've got 5 hours for this podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, two things. I love that. Before I even dive into that, I love what you just said too, Evan, about designing your life. The tagline for my business I chose was design a life you love. And the whole idea of blueprint for living was, hey, let's actually take a look at how blueprints form the foundation for, they give us the plan for what it is that we want to do. I just recently talked with a client just yesterday morning who he does all of this problem solving for everybody else, and he's really good at running projects. And we finally settled on, hey, why don't we actually consider your life one of those projects? That might actually that might actually give you some traction, because it's like he does all this problem solving for everybody else and planning their lives, and then when it comes to his own, he's just completely at a loss as to where to even start. But quickly, so defining coaching. Coaching is really interesting. The best way that I would define coaching is it's a forward-looking. How would I do this? Coaching is a partnership, and it's a forward-based conversation to look at where are you now, where do you want to be, and what's in the way of you getting there. There's a distinction between that and therapy. It's very different. Therapy, I mean, and I always go over this with my clients because a lot of people kind of conflate the two, right? Therapy is more of a past-based conversation designed to make you healthy and happy and whole where you are now, right? The coaching conversation assumes that you already are happy, healthy, and whole, and that there's just stuff in the way, and that you hold the answers, you just can't see it, right? It's just because of your circumstances, because you're in the thick of it. So the coach comes in as a partner to walk you along that. You set goals and you set milestones, you put together a plan and everything, but the coach's job is to actually, from 30,000 feet, stand on the outside and point to the things that nobody else in your life is going to point to because they're too close to you. Right? My job is actually to say the thing that nobody else will say, to kind of poke at the nerve. I had a mentor who once said you should go into every coaching conversation expecting to get fired because I get to say the thing that doesn't get said. I also often tell people 99% of what I do is put people at choice. So we go through the day, and this is applicable not only to architects, but just everyone in general. We walk through the day with all this stuff in the background that's running the show. We're not even aware of it. It's just behind the scenes.
Sure.
And so much of what my job is to actually say, hey, let's take a look at this thing that's behind you. Let's pull it out and actually distinguish what it is. And is it serving you? Is it in your way? Like, what's the impact of that thing? And once we've distinguished it, then the person can be fully at choice because now they've seen it, they can choose it. When it's operating in the background, it's just a default knee-jerk response to circumstances. So much of my conversation with clients is pulling stuff out and saying, you're in the driver's seat. What do you want to do? I'm here to read the map and to point things out to you, but you're the one who's setting the path. But they can be super, super powerful conversations. There is one thing I wanted to kind of lay down is there are two different types of coaching. Two strains of coaching, if you will. The first one is facilitative coaching. And any coach worth his or her salt is a facilitative coach and can do facilitative coaching. Mm-hmm. The other strain is ontologically based coaching. That's a little more, it's not so confusing when I explain it. Ontology is the study of being. It's actually looking at who we are being about what we're up to in our lives. So the best way to illustrate this would be with an example. Let's say that you come to me and say, hey, David, I'm bankrupt and I want to retire in 10 years. Can you coach me, right? Sure, we got a lot of work to do. But what we're going to do from the facilitative side is we're going to look at your income and expenses. We're going to make sure that you've got savings set up, that you're connected with a financial advisor, that you've got a bookkeeper, accountant, that you're using some kind of tracking software. And we put together a budget and a plan to get you from bankruptcy to retirement in 10 years with milestones and everything else. And then we check in on you. That's what the calls are about. And see, hey, did you take on the thing you said you were going to do? what got in the way, and let's distinguish that and make a plan to move beyond it, right? That's all facilitative coaching, and any good coach is able to do that. Ontologically based coaches can do all of that, but then we're trained specifically to have conversations about who they're being, about what they're up to. So, for example, hey, what's your relationship to money? Let's take a look at that, right? What does money represent to you? Who are you being about your finances? And we start to take a look at the thoughts and the beliefs and the patterns and everything that's sort of running the show, right? And pull it out into the limelight so we can actually talk about it, distinguish it, and put the person at choice. And actually, that's where the transformational shift happens. That's where the really powerful conversations happen, because you're really getting to the core of why people are showing up the way they do. You see the same thing happen with people who go on a diet, right? And they'll go on the diet and they'll lose the weight, but then the weight comes back. And it's largely, usually, because they haven't addressed their relationship to food, right? What is food doing for you? What does food represent to you? So that's the ontological side of the thing. And the reason I bring this up is because for most architects, we are trained to be very facilitative, right? You're presented with a problem, and you're presented with tasks. You put together a blueprint, you put together a plan, and you come up with a solution, and you work towards the solution.
Process and workflow, right?
It's very,
like
very much.
We do
right?
it over project after project after project.
Absolutely.
Right?
And things are very, very known. Where this gets us in trouble is that oftentimes we're so immersed in the process that we're not taking care of ourselves and why we're actually doing this in the first place. We get wrapped up in the creation of things, but it's sometimes can get divorced from our purpose for being there and doing that work. When I started my firm, I started it out of frustration. I was pissed off. I hated my job. I was upset, and I just saw no path, so I quit, right? And I spent the next 10 years doing what I would now tell people not to do, right? I had learned, I researched, I learned how to run a firm, all the mechanics of it, how to hire people, how to do payroll, how to do business, how to market, and everything else. What I wasn't connected to is why I was actually there and what I was doing it all for. So I start working with people and getting them kind of tied back to this. This is why most architects that I had met when I was talking about the cocktail parties, they were so burned out because they weren't connected to their purpose. They weren't connected to, what am I doing this all for? They'd lost that. And so a lot of the work that I do with folks is getting them reconnected. You never hear of nobody goes into architecture saying, I want to draw bathroom details for the rest of my life, right?
Wait.
As far as, well, maybe you did, Cormac, I don't know. No, but we all know that the vast majority of people who go into architect have a noble purpose, a reason for doing it. They want to have an impact. They want to design beautiful spaces that will affect people's lives. They want to reduce homelessness. They want to, right? There are larger reasons. And then slowly through the process of studio culture and interning and taking your boards and then working your way up the ladder, most of the people I know lose their connection to that.
Right.
And it sort of withers and dies. And the result is you end up really cynical and really frustrated and super burned out and really unhappy. And that's...
I found that compounds, right? Because people who have that demeanor, that outlook, attract others with very similar, or I'll say it's very contagious. I mean, so even if somebody, the cynicism is because if you have somebody who that gets spread very easily. It's easy to go down that path of complaining and cynicism. And,
well, because when you
then,
run into somebody else who's a cynic, it just becomes this reinforcing pattern, right?
Yeah,
oh, you're
right.
a cynic too? Yeah, isn't life horrible?
Yeah.
And clients suck and projects are always horrible. Like it just becomes you think the same way I do? Yeah, let's collude together to reinforce our story that architecture is hard and that needs to be a slog, and we're just making our way to retirement.
That's super interesting, man, because
right.
there's just been a couple things that have come up recently in my life where it's like you become what you say. And so if you do complain about that stuff and you blame other people, it's always their fault. Or if you say, oh man, I even just getting older, right? You're just like, oh, I hurt. I'm sore. Yeah. This is hard. And then it's like, you just notice that like that tends to come out more often because you're just reinforcing your own belief when you say it out loud. You say it to your spouse, you say it to your kids, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, that becomes you. And so I think what's so interesting is like the behavioral side of all of this. And I have to imagine, and my question is, this sounds really hard. Do people get scared away from this coaching, from these life changes? Because it sounds really hard, because you got to go deep and you have to really dig into this kind of stuff.
When you mentioned people sort of complaining, right? It's super easy to do. That's the easy part.
Sure.
Because you don't have to take responsibility for the life you've created, right?
Yeah.
And what you do by complaining, in coaching we call it being at effect of your circumstances, is you externalize all your power. You basically push it all out there. It wasn't me, it was the client. It was the project. It was the city. It was the permitting process. It was my colleagues. It was my boss, right? By doing that, you give away all of your power and take no responsibility for who you are showing up in the world, right? It doesn't mean that we can't complain about stuff,
right?
But you do have, if you can take responsibility for how you're showing up in the world, in your career, in your relationship with your partner, your spouse, with your kids, in society, there's a tremendous power that comes with that, because now you've got agency. And a lot of people that show up, that I get phone calls from, feel stuck. And it's because they don't have connection to their own agency. They don't see a path to creating the life that they really want. Mm-hmm. So they've lost connection with what life they actually want. And then even if they have that connection, they don't see a path to get there. And that's where I step in. It's absolutely amazing how many people, if I said, where do you want to be in 10 years? They have no clue.
Yeah.
They haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
Right?
I wanted to bring that up because it's like, that does sound like that. I would be in that camp. Where do you want to, I can't even plan 6 months from now. Right. And I can't even plan next summer's like vacation. Like we had this conversation today. My son's going to go to summer camp next year. And he was like, July, he's like doing the math. He's like, okay, I don't have to think about that right now, is what he was thinking. Right. Because that is so far away. And that's how I think we tend to operate as well.
Well, even
go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, even architects, because of, as we've said, it's just like we're so project focused or client focused or all of the externally focused things that we find it really hard to, when somebody says, okay, well, Evan, where are you going to be in 10 years? It's just like, I was like, I've planned out, all of this stuff for this project. This is where I'm going to be. We're so inwardly focused to that when, and you're right, that we're not really focused on ourselves. We're focused on the tasks of everything that we have to do.
How to get there. Yeah.
I struggled when I went into coaching, because at first I had a story that if I went into coaching, I wasn't an architect anymore and people wouldn't take me seriously as an architect.
Your identity's kind of wrapped up in that title.
It was sort of like, I've spent so much blood, sweat, and tears and money and time and everything else to get here.
Yeah.
I'm really giving this up. And it was a pretty existential struggle for me until I finally clicked that I'm an architect no matter what I'm doing.
Right.
B, there is a nexus between coaching and architecture, which is really fascinating. Yeah. Architects, more than almost any other profession, are uniquely trained to create possibility where none exists.
Right. Right.
Coaches are uniquely trained to create possibility where none exists. And that's the place where I get to play. So what's fun is to reconnect somebody with their possibility and strengthen that muscle. Because again, you go into architecture schools, and I mean, we've all seen the models and the drawings and the stuff. It's wild. It's expressive. It's out there completely.
It's magic.
And I know it is magic. And I know that, in studio, gravity doesn't necessarily have to matter. But somehow that gets stripped away and squashed, and that muscle atrophies.
Yeah.
So I had somebody come to me, and she said, she's an architect, an amazing woman. She had written books. She was running a successful practice, and she just wanted, she's like, I want to get to the next level. And I said, okay, so what's your income? What do you want to have as an income goal? And she said, well, last year I brought in, I think it was, I don't know, $280,000 for myself. And I said, okay, and so what would you like to set as your goal? And she says, I think 290,000 would be a really good goal. And I told her, I said, okay, first of all, good for you to have a goal. And secondly, don't hire me. Please don't hire me. That's not the game I'm here to play.
So incremental.
Right? Because I asked her, I said, if you continue doing what you're doing now, is it kind of predictable that you'd get to 290, right?
Welcome to your cost of living increase.
She goes, oh, yeah. And I said, so there's this continuum between predictability, possibility, and pie in the sky, right? And where we get to play is what's actually possible for you. Like, what if you doubled your income? Right? And her eyes just went really wide. And I said, maybe that's pie in the sky for you. Maybe that's possible. But she'd never even considered that as an option. Mm-hmm. And she finally came out and she said, you know what? I'd love to make an extra 100,000 this next year. And I said, go. And do you feel that that's possible? You got to keep checking in, right? Yeah. Because something that's possible for her might be pie in the sky for somebody else. But we want to get beyond what's predictable. And so, again, exercising that possibility muscle, getting people to really see, like, wow, what can I do? It's really powerful. It's fun.
How do you get people past that? Because, and I'm just speculating here, people who come to you, do they feel like they're in a rut? Do they feel like, there's kind of no forward momentum? I mean, how do you get them out of that mentality of just like, because it's going to take a lot of people, it's going to take a lot of like effort for somebody to actually come to you in the first place. Right. I finally admitted that I have a problem, and I don't know how to fix that problem, but I know that I have that problem. It's just like, so that's a big step in its own right. But it's like, because I will say that after 20 some odd years plus in the profession, I've met so many people, so many things, that hold people back, and it's all, a mental block. I've experienced it myself, and it's just, and it's really, and it's so like, it's really hard to see that there might be something else out there. It's just like, oh, if I go to this other firm, I'm going to do a lateral move, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And it's really, so how do you help people realize that there's something, there's greener grass, I guess?
It's a great question. Everybody's unique. Everyone's different. And I have to practice meeting them where they're at. So there are some clients who come and they know exactly what they want. They're on it. They have the plan. They've worked it out, and they know that there's some stuff in the way, but they're like a pit bull. They've just figured it out. There's other people who are like, I kind of know what I want, but I don't know how to get there.
Right.
And then I've got other people who are like, I don't know what I want, and I don't know how to get there, and I can't see it.
Right.
And with somebody like that, part of it is a practice in, you got to go in smaller steps. So you kind of have to adjust things down and get them to start seeing outside of their circumstances, right? Start practicing even in small ways, looking at, well, what would it be like if such and such happened? Right. Sometimes I'm suggesting it to them just to kind of prime the pump. Other times, it's funny. Sometimes silence is the best coaching you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that too. Working with
let
clients,
somebody do their thing.
Help them help themselves, right? And so by staying silent and making people do a little bit of the work gives them ownership over the work. When you do this in parenting all the time with kids, it's like they ask you a question and you respond by saying, "Well, what do you think?" Right? And
right.
What do you
Which
think?
is supremely
the
annoying, right?
I'm sure it is. And at the same time, when they have an idea, it's their idea, and they have more ownership over overcoming or putting it into practice.
Yeah, you totally hit on something too, and it's the other distinction. I talked about the distinction between therapy and coaching. There's also a distinction between consulting and coaching. My job as a coach is not to give you the answer. My job is to help you find the answer that already exists. I don't have to know somebody's profession to coach them effectively. I know a woman who did a training program, and she was looking to niche, and she didn't know what kind of market she wanted to coach, and she got referred to a guy who was a brain surgeon, and she said, I don't know a thing about brain surgery. But she coached him so effectively, he referred her, and now she coaches only brain surgeons, right? And she still knows nothing about brain surgery because it's not about brain surgery. Right.
This is like Rick Rubin. I'm totally into Rick Rubin right now, and he wrote an amazing book, a few months ago, and he's a Grammy-winning record producer. He's won all the awards. He's done all the big artists, and people ask him all kinds of questions about music, and he is the first person to tell you he knows nothing about music. Right. He knows, and you say, how can that possibly be? Like you've recorded with Johnny Cash and the Beastie Boys and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Jay-Z and like all these amazing artists, and he's just like, I just have a particular taste that seems to align with most people out there of what they want to hear, and I'm good at tapping into finding those kinds of things. And he trusts that process that he goes through to get there. And people trust him because he's built a reputation around it. And does he know if it's going to work? No, he does not know if it's going to work. But he doesn't know how to operate a soundboard, and he doesn't know how to mix or master music, and he doesn't care about the structure of a song or the theory behind the chords or anything like that. And I think that is super interesting because it is all about like just tapping into your taste and what feels right, and intuition, and like the softer side of all of this stuff, I think is really interesting.
Well, just to go a little bit further on the Rick Rubin is, Evan and I have a favorite song by a band that, he produced. And I watched a documentary of, the production of that song. And that song, they were so frustrated with him because he wasn't telling them what to do. He wasn't guiding them in the way that they thought they needed to be guided, and like, tell me how this is supposed to go. Yeah. And honestly, it is, in my opinion, one of the most perfect songs because he guided them to use and trust the tools that they have. Without really saying, this is how you use this tool. This is how you use this. This is how you arrange all of this stuff together. And, if you haven't heard, or if you have No Hard Feelings by the Avett Brothers, listen to it because it is an amazing song. And they were so frustrated with him because he didn't tell them how to do that song. But because they had the tools, he just guided them on trusting that they knew how to get there. And the the proof was definitely in the pudding with that one. It was so amazing what they were able to achieve because they trusted themselves. They trusted that they knew how to do it.
That's awesome. There's something about, I think one of the greatest things about coaching is developing people's self-awareness, understanding what their gifts are, getting reconnected to that, and also honing the skills that they may or may not already have.
Right.
And pointing to, as you say, the softer side of stuff. And people have different abilities in this area. I was running a workshop for a group who are doing strategic planning stuff, and I brought up there's a practice that we learned in coaching called distinguished sharing, and it's basically I hated it, but it's hugely useful. So we'd walk into a coaching weekend and everybody's sitting around a table and the leaders would come in and the place would fall silent, and then they'd say, so who wants to share? And of course, nobody ever wanted to be the person who shared. Right. But finally, somebody would break down after the silence got too long and they would tell something that happened or they'd share something in their lives. And then they'd turn to somebody else and say, so what did you hear? Right? And that person had to basically say, well, what I'm understanding that person is saying, blah, 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 blah. The whole idea was practice on both sides, right? It's practice in speaking, and speaking with clarity and with intention. And it's practice in listening. Yeah. And then checking in with each other to see that the first person, the speaker, could say, well, that actually wasn't what I was intending to say, right? So it's a good way of checking. Across the board, this isn't just architects, this is people in general. We are horrible communicators, just absolutely horrible communicators. Mm-hmm. And it's the cause of 90% of the problems in architecture firms. When I introduced distinguished sharing to this group I was running, one of the guys, there was a lot of nodding. One of the guys says, I think we should do this, right? And he says, next time we have a board meeting, and I say something, I'm going to turn to you and say, what did I just say?
Like,
and I said, okay. Thanks for picking up what I put down. Yeah. And consider that you just sounded like everyone's angry mother, right? Like right. It was almost accusatory, right? Right? It's that tone, and it's so many people are tone deaf. They just don't hear it and understand. I said, so what if we, with the same intention, said, what did you just get from what I shared? Right?
Yeah, I was gonna say that there's so much in that tone, and what I picked up from that kind of a edict was that what that person just said, they think is the most important thing that can ever be said, and so therefore you should be listening to me. Right. Yeah. And I was also thinking earlier, as you were talking about the sharing aspect of it, is a lot of people aren't listening because they're so worried about what they're going to say next. Right. And so they're not even listening at all. And and the honest answer is, well, I didn't hear you because I was so inside of my own head, so worried about what I was going to say. And if nobody's listening, then what's actually happening in that space? It's you don't even need to be there. Right.
Yeah. Or they've already got their own idea of what's right. And so they're not listening because they're ready to pounce and put their own opinion out there, again, without any communication, without it listening. So it's a lot of, I definitely have a lot of coaching calls that start with what I call the drama du jour, where the person shows up and there's, so-and-so in the office just said blah, 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 and then the client blew up. And there's usually some big brouhaha that's going on that we have to address. But after they've had a chance to sort of let that out, then we actually talk about, so what actually was going on here in the space? Right. And that's where the light bulb starts to go off and they start to see how they reacted. And we start looking at different ways. So that's where leadership coaching comes in as well. It's sort of like, how do you lead a group where you've got people with different opinions and they're not necessarily always listening to each other? Right. And that shows up in every single meeting. I saw some meme on Facebook today, and it was a sign that was posted on on a boardroom, and it says only one person allowed in the boardroom at any time. I thought, well, that solves all the communication problems, right?
You make all the decisions. Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm thinking about how, I mean, this, you're not making it sound pleasurable to go through this process. And I don't mean that. I mean, it's a little cynical of a statement, right? Because it is hard work. And I think it's really hard for people to choose to work on themselves. As we kind of started out the conversation, where we're so good at getting into the lane of solving other people's problems and figuring out these puzzles and these challenges every day that we become kind of numb to ourselves, and we're just a vehicle to get the work done. And it actually is hard to, like I said earlier, step back and do a status check. How am I actually feeling? How am I communicating? If you were to ask people to tell you or just respond, what do you sense in my tone? How do I come across? Because I think a lot of times we wouldn't want to hear the answer, right? If we're honest with ourselves. And so that is hard work. And yet we're so good at doing hard work, right? It's interesting to me to think about the exact parallels between working on ourselves, working on people, as it is to working on projects. Like, we show up every day to do the hard work that doesn't get any congratulations, right?
Right.
And you do that hard work day in, day out, and you deliver projects, and it's magic. Like, somehow it works out. Cormac and I have talked about that too. We have no idea how buildings actually get built, because if you actually look at the process, it's a complete disaster.
Sausage factory.
It's crazy. Right. And if we were to think about ourselves in that way, with kind of the things that you're talking about, with this approach, and actually stepping back and looking at ourselves or our businesses and having the intention to design a future outcome, that's what we do all the time. I don't think anybody should be scared of that, but we're scared of it because it's us, because we've put so many barriers up, or we've hidden behind so many different masks that we're actually somebody else when we show up to work, and we don't even know who we are anymore. I just, these are the kinds of thoughts that are crossing my mind as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, transformation is terrifying. It really is, right? People don't like change. None of us likes change, and coaching. It can be difficult, right? It takes courage. It takes courage for people to pick up the phone and call me in the first place, to just say, hey, I think I need some partnership. I need somebody to support me, right? We're not trained to do that at all. So that's the first hurdle. And I'm always thanking people and acknowledging them for having the courage to step forward and just ask for support. That's a huge deal. And then I think part of it is it's not all like wooden pegs under the fingernails kind of stuff, right? It's there is some celebration of wins, and I'm always making sure that we're kind of checking ourselves, like how are we doing? How's it been going? Oh, you did this thing. How are you going to celebrate that? How are we going to actually acknowledge the progress that's already happened? Because we also have a tendency to not celebrate our wins.
Totally.
Right. We have a tendency, you get the thing done and you're on to the next thing.
Yep.
And there's no acknowledgement of, hey, that thing that I just did, that was pretty freaking awesome, right? So part of what I put in too is we find ways to reward people for taking on the hard work. Sometimes it's just small things. It's just, so in addition to creating the path and taking the actions, I'm often with people creating some practices based on our conversations. So sometimes it's as easy as, hey, this week, let's just notice when such and such shows up. You don't have to do anything about it, but it's about building your awareness. Oh, there's that thing that always triggers me. And this time I actually didn't, I noticed it coming. I responded differently. They're small things, but as you start to practice it over time, they can really create a massive shift. So it can be fun, and especially when you get to the end of a project. I I got one quick story. I had an architect I was working with in Spokane, and he had reached out to me because he was debating whether to even stay in the profession. So we created a career project around that, but I always have my clients create a couple different projects because we're holistic beings, right? And if we can distinguish how you're showing up in one part of your life, I guarantee you're showing up that way in one way or another in every part of your life. So I asked him, I said, what would be a fun project? Like the career thing, that's going to be a lot of work. What would be a project you could win at? And he says, I always wanted to be a pilot. I said, oh, awesome. Okay. And this was I think it was maybe June of that year. And I said, so would you like to create a project around getting your pilot's license? He says, yeah, that'd be really good. And I said, okay, so by when do you want to be a pilot? And he goes, well, I'm told that if I really, really work hard and study and do all of the flights and everything else, probably by end of October. And I said, okay, so October 30th, 31st, you'll have your pilot's license. And he hesitates and he goes, well, yeah, but that's a lot of work. I don't know that I have that much time. He says, let's say by the end of the year.
This is me.
January 31st.
Yeah.
I said, December 31st, great, you'll have your license. And he goes, yeah, but the weather's awful. It's snowing and it's cold. And he says, let's say April. I said, got it. April 30th, you'll have your. And he goes, you know what? It's June. Let's just say within the next year. And I stopped and I said, Craig, do you see what's going on here? And he stopped. And I said, there's a reason you're not a pilot. And he started laughing. And I said, look, I don't care. I don't have a dog in this race at all.
Right.
I don't care if you set it 10 years from now or 10 weeks from now. But I'm going to ask you to choose a by when date, and then we'll form a project around it. And he says, but I don't know how to do it. And I said, it doesn't matter. Set, choose, and make a declaration as to when you're going to do it. And there was a long pause, and he said, October 31st. And I have no idea how it's going to happen. I don't have the money. I don't think I have the time. Long story short, he called me on October 30th from the cockpit of an airplane, and he was doing his first flight.
Nice.
Now, the reason, too, he walked in without the idea of how to do the thing, but he set the intention and he made the commitment. And we created a path, projects outlined to get him there. And one of the jobs was for him to research flight schools. And so he went around and he found one he really wanted, and he asked the guy, how much does it cost? And the man told him, and he looked dejected and he says, I don't have that money. And as he was walking away, the guy says, well, excuse me, you said you were an architect? My wife and I are looking to build a second home. Maybe we could work something out. And he called me up and he says, you're never going to believe what happened. I said, actually, I'm going to believe what happened, right? Because he put it out there, he created that. I firmly believe, it's a little woo-woo, but I firmly believe he set the intention, he made the commitment, and it showed up.
That's
and
cool.
His life changed. He flies around the Pacific Northwest now.
That's so cool.
And that's the kind of stuff that it just, to have that impact on people and to have them happy. Another client came up to me after an AIA workshop that I did at a conference, and she was holding back. People were talking to me and they all left, and she came up and she said, my name's so-and-so. I want to coach. You're the guy. How do we start? I said, oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you. And can maybe sit down and we'll talk about what you want. And she sat down and she said, I got a solid job, making good money. I have a partner that I love. I have 2 kids, and I lose a little bit of my soul every day I walk into my office. And she burst into tears.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, brilliant woman. And she was stuck. And she's just like, I can't do this anymore, right? A year later, she had left the job. She had formed her own company. And she now, she introduces and connects architect innovators who are creating solutions for climate change with angel investors.
Wow.
And that's her job. And she came to me at the beginning when we were creating this project, and I said, so what's the measure of this? How will we know that you've achieved what you want? And she said, without hesitating, she said, I want to affect the lives of 375 million people. I was like,
Nice.
okay. And that's what I mean. There are some people who are like, once she had parted the clouds and started to lift her head up and see the horizon, she's like, that's the impact I want to have. And she's doing it.
So do you find it hard that, or at least it's that, I guess it's that initial parting of the clouds. I mean, how is that a struggle with almost everybody that calls, or is it, kind of, you talked about like 3 different tiers. And so there's the tier of the people who just come in, they've already made their plan, and they're just looking for somebody to kind of like maybe help facilitate their, but I mean, I think it was that bottom tier. That's the one that, like I work with them every day. I talk to people outside of, where I work or in the profession and things like that live that kind of like fear of not knowing what's next, and is the person who cries, about like the profession, or is disgruntled and sarcastic and stuff, and just really, doesn't know where to go next, and I guess that for me, because I try to be a cheerleader for everybody and kind of, talk about, and, Evan and I do this all the time, sort of for each other as well, is talk about the why, the passion about what, why we do what we do. The kind of like the root of behind the reason we do the podcast too is, is that constant connection to the passion. And we see so many people falling out of love with, falling out of passion, or losing connection with that passion. And, I feel like recognizing like the hardest thing to do, and you both have said it, pretty eloquently, that the hardest thing to do is to really recognize that it's a problem, that is, it's like, okay, I mean, people know that it's a problem, but they kind of externalize it. It's just like, well, I've got bad employees, I've got bad, projects, I've got bad clients, but they don't really realize that they're, as you said, equally responsible or really responsible for that. And I'm just wondering how hard it is for them to kind of like come out of that shell and realize, oh, it's me.
Yeah.
It isn't you. It is me.
Right? Yeah.
It's not you, it's me. Yeah.
It's, I'll be honest. Every once in a while, there's a really hard nut to crack.
Yeah.
There's like somebody who shows up and they're so disconnected that they just can't see the forest for the trees. Usually with someone like that, I try to take them back to what got them into architecture in the first place. Because usually that was the seed. Like, people don't go into architecture for, well, I've said it before, like most people go in with some larger vision, some grander idea of an impact that they want to have, and they've just lost it. So that's usually a great starting point, is to kind of at least reconnect them to that. The other one too, and this happens with a lot of people, is I get people who come to me and say, so what's your career goal? And they'll say, I want to make $250,000. Okay. What for? Well, and then there's a long pause because they have no idea.
Yeah, a lot of people think that number equals
right?
happiness, right? And
or whatever number it is for them, it's a number.
There's no more depth beyond that.
But it's not connected to any purpose or any what would that $250,000 make possible for you?
Right.
There's there's an exercise that I've done with people. It's a life purpose exercise, and it's a lot of fun actually. And I really kind of copped onto it, where you're asking the person, okay, so if there were a reason for you to be here in the world, what would it be? What's your purpose? And so, for example, somebody might say, well, I want to feed all of the starving children in the world. Laudable, great, awesome goal, right? But then you can ask them, so, okay, let's imagine that all the starving children in the world were fed. What would that make possible? Oh, well, And then you get people say, well, then I guess they would be achieving all of their dreams. Okay, so if they were achieving all of their dreams, what would that make possible? And you do this over and over and over until you start to get pretty meta, right? You start to get up to, oh, what would be possible? Well, I think actually the world would just be full of joy. And you go, okay, so is your life purpose joy? And for the vast majority of people, that resonates. Mm-hmm. And it's magical, because all of a sudden there's a reason, oh, wait a minute. Not only is this thing that I said I want to do, its whole purpose is to create joy in the world. But if my purpose is joy, I can manifest that in a billion different ways. Right? I can actually be joy out in the world, in the way I interact with people and in the conversations I have and the projects I take on. So again, it's a simple exercise, but at the same time, it's kind of, so, I mean, my purpose was wonder. And it was just the thing that landed when they said, is your life purpose wonder? And it's like, holy moly. It just landed, right? It was like, wow, that's why I'm an architect. That's why I'm curious about things. That's why. So I get to go out there, and I bring that to my coaching, is this sense of awe for these beautiful human beings who are so amazingly talented in this profession, and help them get reconnected to the spark, the thing that just has them go, wow, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing it. And the fun part is when you start pursuing that life purpose, the $250,000 happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Things tend to fall into place.
Does.
Yeah.
Right.
I get it.
It's a version of, do what you love and the money will follow. But, but it's true.
I had this, just in my cubicle at one of the firms that I used to work for, and that piece of paper, went with me pretty much everywhere. And unfortunately, I don't have it with me right now, but it was just a question mark. And people used to come up and they would ask, "What does that mean?"
You'd say yes,
and it would be question everything. And I started to refine that to specifically with architecture. It's the question of why. Why are you doing this? And it isn't just about, like, say, the project, which, I do that as well. It's just like, well, why are you drawing that? And it's just like, well, I'm drawing that because, you told me to. It's like, no, you're drawing that because why? And, really wanting to know, I want them to understand why it is that they're doing what they're doing, and not just like, oh, I'm clicking away and doing bathroom details because you asked me to. It's like, no, but it's a part and a piece to a greater whole. Yeah. And so you always have to ask the why you're doing what it is you're doing, and how does it contribute to the next step, and the next step to the complete step. And so that question mark became then the why. And then so now
I love it.
I try to I probably annoy a lot of people, but I'm always asking why. Why are you doing that? Why is this? What is that? But it's also leaving to myself, it's like, why am I doing this? And I do a little bit more existential why, but it's still why, because it leads up to that complete whole.
So going back, this is a great circle back to when we were talking about people designing their career or their firm, right? And doing it sort of from the mechanics of it rather than being connected. Mm-hmm. It's the place, that's where the ontological conversation actually happens, right? What do you want to be in the world? Like, who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to be known professionally and personally? What are the values that you hold most dear? And how will your firm reflect those values? And how can you authentically align your firm with your values?
Yeah.
What impact do you want to have? What do you want your legacy to be? And what will make you most happy? Like what are the conditions of this firm that would leave you satisfied? Those are the questions that I never asked myself when I started my own firm.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd had that knowledge then.
Yeah.
But it's definitely what I bring to clients who are now starting up their own practice. It's like, okay, I get it, that the mechanics, and yeah, we can talk about the mechanics, and I can bring, I always own when I'm switching from coach to consultant, and sometimes I have clients who are like, just tell me the answer. Right.
Yeah.
And if I know something, if I have a resource or if there's an experience I've had, I'll let them know, okay, like, I'm not coach at the moment. This is more from consultant. Here are some suggestions of things that worked for me that might work for you. But bringing in, once the mechanics are dealt with, you got to have that foundational stuff, because otherwise that alignment between your values and the character of the firm, it's the character. Firms are an extension of who we are, and we spend so much time and energy investing in them. Right?
Yeah.
If we're not aligned with them, if they're not aligned with us, it's a lot of work.
I want to ask you about that, because I think you have to imagine if this all went really well, what the potential is here, right? Because there is so much misalignment between values with the people, teammates, project teams, firms, clients that firms take on, project types that firms take on with the people who are there. And, there's a misalignment of incentives to that are metrics to success even. And so there's so much misalignment potential because people aren't talking about this stuff. Like, they don't talk about it with each other. It's not written on the wall. People don't know what the firm's values are. They don't know what the board's values are. They don't know what the leadership's values are, because these aren't things that are discussed out in the open.
Right.
And then there's this other side of it, which I assume that kind of drives you and your work forward, which is like, man, imagine what it would be like if these things were in alignment. Like, okay, yeah, you should not work there anymore, and you should totally work over there because like that's perfect for you. And you could start to see those things. I kind of think about our profession and how much we bury under the surface. And I know it's not just our profession, but let's just talk about it like it's just our profession, right?
Right.
What is the potential there? What do you see? I mean, what is the picture you could paint? What is the vision for what it could be like? Having crucial conversations like these in the open, talking about values, alignment of values, why that's important, where that leads in the success ladder, and all the different ways that you could even talk about that. Because I mean, that's a huge subject, but I mean, is there any kind of just like 30,000 foot level bullet points that people might resonate with when they start thinking about what's possible with this potential?
Yeah, I think. I mean, the potential is almost impossible to quantify, right? There's just, but if I were to say at a really, really high level, it's about integrity. And when we're in integrity with our values and how we want to show up, there's tremendous power in that. And it's power that extends beyond the firm. It extends into relationships. It extends into society. When people are so to be clear too, the definition I use for integrity is a little bit different. It doesn't have the moral judgment on it. So the equation is integrity is intentions, speaking, and actions aligned. So if your intentions and your speaking and your actions are aligned, then you're in integrity. If they're not, if one of them's out of whack, you're not in integrity. It's not a bad thing, right? There's no moral judgment on it. It's simply a tool. So I use integrity as a tool. And so the only thing to do is look and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm out of integrity in this thing. And being out of integrity is a power leak. So if you see something where you're not in integrity, the only thing to do is to check, what were my intentions? Are they still there? What's my speaking about it? Am I talking the talk? And then what are the thoughts? I said intention, speaking, and actions. Are my actions aligned with that? Whichever one of those is out of alignment, address it, and you bring that. And I've done this before myself. There's this immediate sense of reclaiming power. So the impact, like what my vision is people out there who are actually practicing architecture powerfully from integrity. So they're taking on projects that are aligned with their values. They're saying no to clients who are not aligned with our values, which takes a lot of courage, especially when you're running a firm, right?
Yeah.
To actually see. I saw a posting on Facebook's Entre Architects group, and it was this guy who, I don't know, it was very obvious from his post. He posted an email between him and this client who obviously is completely off his rocker, right?
Yeah.
And very threatening, all sorts of legal stuff and everything else. And
I remember that.
a ton of people were saying, drop the person. Like, just what are you doing? And that was my thought too, is like, it sounds like he's gotten caught in this thing and he should step away so he can be in integrity with what his firm is about. But imagine if everybody were taking on projects that were aligned with their goals and values, if they were aligning themselves with clients who had similar vision and values, and were generating spaces that also had integrity and were contributing to a larger social dimensions of the society that we live in. That's like phenomenal. That's just so amazing.
I think about the analogy of architects talk about all the time about the value of housing, like legitimate housing for people who are unhoused or are super low income housing, or you can think about this in the different ways. But we've seen projects, even at like Monterey Design Conference, firms are presenting projects that are inexpensive to build, but a humongous upgrade for people who are inhabiting those spaces. And then what that allows them to contribute back to their communities by having that basic need met, right? Yeah. That they are then able to contribute back to their community, to their kids' school, to their jobs, because they don't have to worry about where they're going to sleep that night, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
Again, if we apply that to our own lives, if we are in alignment, if we are in integrity, how much better are we going to perform at our jobs? If our firms are in alignment and in integrity with our values and with picking the right clients for that work, how much better are those projects going to make an impact in the world? I mean, like, you go back to that original intention of becoming an architect. A lot of people want to become an architect because architecture can change the world, literally can change the world. The built environment can make the world a better place. And
absolutely. Right.
There aren't too many professions out there that can really claim that in a very physical way, right? That the way architecture can. And I just think about that potential, like going back to this idea about what is the potential here. Man, it is.
It's
you can't
massive.
put a number on it. You can't put a definition to it. It could be so incredible. And yet we sacrifice and we cut ourselves short, and we short circuit ourselves, probably a better way to say it, all the time with choosing less, choosing worse.
Well, unfortunately, we're all human. So, right? We have to be somewhat forgiving with ourselves, but there's always the opportunity for practicing and doing it a little bit better. We're not going to flip a switch and all of a sudden
have to do those
chunks. Be in integrity, right? But even integrity, and it runs down from the highest level down to the minutia. Integrity is choosing materials for your project, right? Or choosing a particular design strategy that's more responsive to climate change, for example, if that's what you're aligned with. Think about it. Most architects, I'm going to generalize, are concerned about climate change. And yet a lot of us don't design in integrity with that value, right? And what if we did? And what if we became a demand for clients actually taking responsibility for their design choices, right?
Well, so
It's
there's
huge.
so there's this. I love where we're talking. What we're talking about and the premise behind it, but then there's and I hate to sound like this, but there's always we got to meet payroll. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. And so there's the sacrifices that people do make to the integrity that they say, we wouldn't normally take this project on, but, we've fallen short for our projections. So we're going to take this project on and we're going to do that. And then that, kind of like leads to other things. And it sometimes it's hard to kind of reconcile, what you should be doing with what you do.
It's super hard. And I think we don't practice it enough that it becomes an excuse.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
So what happens in those situations is our field of view gets very narrowed, and we start to think that the only solution to meeting payroll is to take on this job that's not aligned with who we are.
Right.
And that's false.
It's a trap.
There are a billion other choices that we could make. We just don't necessarily see them. Right. And we've gotten so used to accepting the default of, I just have to take this job, that we've lost the courage to say no to that job and to find anything else that is aligned.
Right.
Architects are master justifiers. Like there is we can post-justify anything, and if it runs rampant.
Yeah.
And the thing about that though is, so you take that project and you start working on that project, and that project is everybody knows, we sacrifice because we're meeting payroll, but then it becomes such a toxic element within the firm that it really does, it adversely affects everything. So it's now completely poisoned the well, right? And and then people are like, and then it just becomes something that people are like, starts to question. It's like, okay, do I belong here? Is this really the place that I thought I was going to be? And it's just but it becomes cyclical effect. Because it is something that does unfortunately somewhat permeate throughout the profession. We make those choices just like, I thought I would go here because it would be better. But
and it shows up in the same with the race to the bottom with a lot of architects too. It's like compromising our value and our worth, because for that paycheck, for that project. I did it. I'll freely admit that I did it because I was in that same mindset. It's a scarcity mindset, right? Right. It's like, I have to take this job because it's the only job out there.
Right.
People have weird. No, it's understandable, but people have very strong context around money and time.
Yeah.
And the scarcity context it's present. It's everywhere, and it gets in the way of people actually seeing other opportunities.
And it creates bad habits. I was thinking about something that you were talking about, in this kind of learned behavior that we have that we learn very young in architecture school, where work is what will set us apart. Work will kind of set us free, kind of thing, and we work so hard and sacrifice our time for this kind of end goal that we don't really understand what the end goal is, but we kind of chase after it, and we work. I'm sad to say that I was having a conversation with somebody over Zoom last night, probably around 10 p.m. With the junior staff members, saying, as we're both working late, and I told her, I was like, I don't want you to get into the bad habits that I've gotten myself into. That is just something. It is a mantle that we used to take pride in. My generation takes pride in. It's like, work, work, work. That's what's going to define who you are. And not seeing that, it's just like you have the opportunity to change that cycle, to break free of it. And as I'm saying all of this, I'm like, wait.
As you're not modeling it.
Exactly.
Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
But this is leadership. I mean, David just did this. You just did it right now, Cormac, which is saying it out loud. I mean, taking responsibility for it. And that is a leadership quality. It is a lack of leadership when that does not happen and people sweep these things under the rug or ignore it or look the other way, however you want to say it, right? It's taking responsibility for it and getting back in integrity, right? Because if you can make an excuse to get there, you can fix it to get back. I mean, those two, and there's that fight or flight mentality, right? Which is like, I'm going to die if I come clean about this. And you're not going to die, right? You're actually going to build a better reputation with the people who are following your lead if you're honest about that and you actually say, you know what, that was a bad decision on my part. We have to go through with it, and then we're never going to do that again. But like that takes leadership. That takes integrity to actually say those things.
It builds trust.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's sorely lacking in a lot of architecture firms too, is trust, communications, openness, transparency. We're just sorely lacking in that. And trust goes such a long way in creating partnership and opportunity and creating possibility. If Cormac, if you just own it, right, and say, hey, look, you know what? I'm realizing I actually should be following my own advice.
Right.
So
exactly.
I'm actually going to do something about it. I'm going to choose.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, I'm going to make a rule of, I'm just not going to be on after, and start small, after 9 p.m., right? I'm just not going to, but that sets the example for somebody.
Right.
Or it might also open up, if you bring them into partnership, you could actually say, so what would you do in my situation? And get them to co-create a practice and a way of being in the firm. And right there, you've just brought that person into partnership. You're building trust with them, and you're acknowledging their value to the firm. Hey, I could really use some support. And you're modeling so many things in just that one move, right?
Well, it goes back to the in integrity, where, when we've done this to ourselves quite often about this misalignment about how we work, like what time we're expected to sacrifice for the profession. And, I always go back to having these conversations. And I just had this conversation with a manufacturer who was in Switzerland. And I was chatting with him, and he's like, go ahead and set a meeting, but, make sure that, it doesn't go past 5 his time. And I'm like, okay, absolutely respectful of your time. I'll go ahead and set it. It was like 4:30 to 5:30 his time. And, we sat there and we just had our chat. And as we were getting closer and closer to it, I could sense that he was getting a little antsy about it. It's just because they're basically going to close up shop and, move on out the door. And it's because they've, have this learned habit of there is no real reason. The work will still be there. But we have taught ourselves that we have got to keep going. It's like how architects design to the very end. It's like, there's no reason to. There's a point to like work and then stop and then do the next phase and then stop and then go to the next phase and then stop. And it really literally should be the same thing with our kind of like day-to-day life, which we don't tend to do when I'm telling somebody at 10 p.m. at night, hey, you really shouldn't be doing this, forgetting to tell myself that I should be doing this as well, And I think it's because I think going back to when we were talking about the hero architect, it's just like, yes, we promised that we would design a bus stop for them in one night. Like, wait, no, we can't do that. And we've misaligned ourselves with this kind of like reality of what it is, and it goes back to like this kind of sacrificing of like, you know, picking a job that we might not want. It's like we don't know how to say no. We don't know how to set our boundaries. We don't know how to really say, okay, is the sacrifice really worth it? Because what do we get out of it?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I was just thinking like the it sounds so daunting. Like this is such a big thing. I mean, when you think about it from a firm or a practice or a team, and I just want to bring it back to starting with yourself, right? And because I think that all the principles that you've laid out could apply at many different levels, but they have to start somewhere. And you've said it several times, you have to start small even, right? Like friend of the show, Rosa Shang, how do you eat the whale, right? You got to one bite at a time. Right? You can't eat the whole whale all at once. And this idea of taking responsibility for yourself, where you are has not been imposed upon you. It's by decisions that you have accepted from other people or decisions that you've made. And coming to terms with that first, and then starting to take small bites moving forward to get to a place that you want to go. And I think something that I've pieced together from you, David, is like, you've got to have a plan of where you're going or you're never going to get there, right? Like you have to have the vision of where you want to be so that you can devise a plan and have an accountability to actually getting there, right? And there
has to be a plan. Without the plan, without an actionable plan with milestones, with goals and everything else, the coaching conversation is just that. It's a nice conversation, but it doesn't have any applicability to your life. So when I'm working with folks, you know, we create a project. I actually use a backcasting process where we set the goal and then we start to work backwards to where you are now. For a couple reasons. One is by backcasting, you short circuit all the circumstances that could stop you from actually getting there. Because a lot of people, when we start planning and we sort of set the goal and then we start thinking, okay, what's the very next thing that I need to do? Oftentimes we're stopped by circumstances, by time, by money, by energy, by resources, right? And the whole thing dies because we run into the walls of our circumstances. By reaching out and saying, I'm going to start with the goal and work backwards. Now we're working from the goal back. You don't have all of those other objections, and you get yourself back to where you are, and then you flip the script, and now you've got the map to get you where you want to go.
You're going. Yeah.
But without that, we're having a nice conversation, but there's nothing that you can apply it to, or there's no structure. So there's always got to be a project or something that the conversation lives in order to have an impact.
Yeah.
And architects should be able to see that because we do that.
Absolutely.
You know, so that.
And I know there are some firms that actually design that way too. They backcast. They set the thing and they work backwards. But small steps. I mean, even in the example that you gave, Cormac, about working late, the small step would be, first of all, I would be curious where that relationship to time and working shows up in the rest of your life too, in terms of overcommitting, overextending, working beyond when you said you might, or crossing over. I'm not saying you do this, but just places to look, right?
Sure.
If that's how it's showing up in work, very likely could be showing up in your personal life as well.
Right.
And then the next thing to do is just say, okay, now that I've seen it, now that I've distinguished this behavior and I'm aware of what the impact of it is, now I get to choose. Am I going to do it? I could keep doing it, or I can choose almost anything else. And so, like I said, you might say, you know what, I'm just going to practice saying, I'm going to shut everything down at 9:00 and I'm offline and I'm off grid.
Right.
And rather than, like a lot of people would say, I'm walking out the door at 5 and nothing, like
cold turkey.
It's probably not. Yeah, the cold turkey thing it can work, but it's probably not reasonable, right? But then you practice that, and then the next time we talk, I'm like, so how was that practice? How did that go? And you're like, oh, well, I managed to stop at 9 3 nights last week, but I went until 11 or 12 the other nights.
Right.
Got it. So we celebrate the fact, first of all, that you managed to do it 3 nights. That's awesome. And take a look at, so how is that different? What was the experience? Do you want to continue doing that? Okay, what's your declaration for this next week? Do you want to go full bore 9 o'clock every night? Or maybe we ratchet it back a little bit and say, every weeknight, I'm going to back it up tonight. It's the small things, but eventually, I don't know if you guys have read James Clear's
Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of that same thing of like setting yourself up. The thing is, you have to set yourself up for success. And that's where it's individual to everyone. Some people want to shoot for the moon. So I work with a coach for personal, but also for professional and ethical reasons. Like if I'm going to help other people with their stuff, I should have somebody helping me work with mine. And with my coach, we distinguished, I have what's called a north face mentality. If you know how most mountain paths are, the north face of a mountain is typically the really, really steep, jagged, rugged one. And it's super steep, super hard. And we called it my north face mentality because every project I took on, it was go for broke, cold turkey, like I'm gonna hit this thing really hard. Right. And I would consistently fail. And I'd get dejected by it, right? I'd be like, oh God, I'm such a loser. I can't do this, whatever. It turns into a pattern. And finally he's like, I've noticed that you do this thing. And once he pointed to it, I was like, oh God, yeah, I do that.
It just took someone else's perspective to
and then
actually
next thing you know,
we
started a South approach.
Interesting.
And so the next thing was, hey, what if you just kind of incrementally made your way to the summit? Simple realization, but it's made a huge difference.
It applies to so many things.
I'm actually experiencing winning.
Yeah.
And that becomes a self-perpetuating thing as well.
It's how you get good at anything, right? Like you can't go to the gym and go deadlift 500 pounds because you can't. Like you can't even deadlift 200 pounds. How are you going to deadlift 500 pounds, right? So you do it by adding a little bit of weight every time you go, or whatever the analogy is, right? But it's I'm not going to lose 50 pounds going to the gym really hard for 3 weeks. No, like you build a habit out of it, and then you realize the byproduct is losing weight. The thing that you put in place was the habit, right? Instead of the goal being losing the weight, because like you said earlier, the weight just comes back if you don't actually build a habit there, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things I love about all of this is just it's unique and individual to every person. That's part of what the challenge of what I do is. Every one of my clients has a different gradient that they're working at. And so the coaching process, as tough as it is, it's also very intimate, which can also be tough. But I really spend a lot of time getting to know my clients and understand what makes them tick and where I can push and where I need to pull back. But establishing that relationship is a huge, huge part of what I do. I had a mentor once who said, from relationship, you can say anything. If you are in adequate relationship with a person, you can say the bold thing and you can always clean it up. You can always circle back and say, hey, do I need to clean up anything with you? Because I know what I said was I might have hit a nerve. And if you're in enough relationship, you can make that happen. If you don't have that relationship, then you have to sugarcoat things. You got to tap dance around and tiptoe and everything else. That's not so fun.
Eggshells.
But part of this is just getting to know my clients and building that relationship so that we can have the authentic conversations. And it's brilliant fun. I love it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I would love for you to talk about maybe some next steps or first steps of what people can do. I know you've got some different things coming up, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to talk about that. Yeah,
thanks. Anyone who would be interested in just having a initial conversation can go to my website. It's blueprintforliving.coach, not .com, .coach. And a couple ways to engage. We can just have a conversation. I also offer what's called an ArcUp strategy session. It's a 2-hour coaching call. It's an hour of coaching, so actually bring something to the call that you want to work on, and then we spend an hour after that working on what's the structure that you need to move forward. Those are a lot of fun. And then I do one-on-one coaching, group coaching, all sorts of stuff, but one of my favorite things that I've got coming up is a mastermind. It's called a Studio 3D Mastermind for solopreneurs and small firm architects. It's a maximum of 6 people over 6 months. We meet twice a month. And masterminding is a little bit different from coaching. It's a different modality, but I do bring coaching into it. And I've done it before. I had wild fun. People created some really cool stuff. And it was exciting. I think the thing I liked the most about it was bringing architects together into a space to support each other, which just doesn't happen. I know, having run my own firm, I often felt like I was on an island, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so to bring a sole practitioner together with 5 other sole practitioners, and every time they meet, 3 of the 6 are in the hot seat, where they get to bring an item, an issue that they're working with, that they're trying to figure out, and they present it, and then the group brainstorms and comes up with ideas and everything for them. And there's accountability and everything else, but that's tremendous fun. So I have that starting up again at the beginning of December and beginning of January. So if anybody's interested in that, you can check that out on the website as well.
Blueprintforliving.coach is the website.
.coach, that is it.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes. I can imagine that group setting has got to be pretty incredible, because I think about it from, Cormac knows I'm huge into athletics. I'm big into sports, right, Cormac?
Sports ball, yeah, that's you.
Yeah. But you see somebody, I love to watch the Olympics. I grew up watching the Olympics with my mom, and it was so fun to watch somebody do something at the Olympics. It's a world record, it's at the 100-meter dash, or it's the, figure skating or bobsled, or like, there's just so many things. And it's not until somebody does the thing that it unlocks it for everybody else. And I can imagine in these settings where you've got 6 different people, and there's shared struggles and there's unique struggles, right, that they're bringing to the table. But just by hearing somebody else talk about their experience, how they solved a problem, how they went about it, it can be so powerful to unlock it for you. And you're just there, secondhand. Like, it wasn't even the thing you were bringing to the table. But I can imagine that a lot, there's almost, exponential gains from being in situations like that, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Even if the topic that's been brought, like I said, there's 3 people each meeting who are in a hot seat, and the other 3 are participating, but they're not, their particular issue isn't being addressed in depth like the others. And yet every single time people walked away and said, you know what, I just learned something. I just got a resource I hadn't even realized existed. You just gave me a new idea about how I can tackle my own issues. Mm-hmm. So that group is just super powerful, and the camaraderie that comes with it, and that's where it really becomes fun. Right?
That's cool.
I mean, people started caring about each other and checking in, and they still stay in touch with each other after the mastermind was over. So
excellent,
super fun stuff, guys. It's great.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Well, David, this has been a fantastic conversation, super valuable. I hope that it landed with a lot of the audience, and that people can see a place to start if they're interested in pursuing this and starting with themselves. So thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's been a wonderful pleasure. I really enjoy the conversation. I'll do it again anytime. This was great.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
You stepped into it because you'll be back.
There we go. Gladly.
All right.